morning, everybody. Thanks for being with us this morning and letting us impart some of our thoughts as we conclude the 2024 regular session. I said the other day on the floor that for all their good intentions, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are just making life harder for our fellow Virginians. I quoted the old adage that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I would submit to you that our friends on the other side have laid down quite a few extra miles of pavement in that regard. If you look back at this session, you can see that over and over again, Democrats are checking boxes for their friends, the radical environmentalists, the trial lawyers, the labor unions, and this is all embodied in the legislation that they're carrying forward under the pretense that it's making life better and less expensive for people that they can afford to care about, which is the people that can at least afford many of the ramifications of these bills. When you say that you're going to make housing cheaper, but the net effect of that is that you're making it more scarce and less affordable, you're doing a disservice to our constituents. Likewise, when you say that you're going to artificially increase wages, expand benefits, make employers pay for those things, you're diminishing opportunities for people to work, decreasing opportunity, and ultimately hurting people's ability to make a living. When you expand the different ways that people can get sued, when you continually pursue this narrative on energy that makes life harder, more expensive, gives consumers fewer choices, all you're doing is making life harder for everybody. And we contend that there's an entire body of work here that's based purely on good intentions, but that is making life much more expensive and unwieldy for the majority of Virginians. So, with that, I want you to hear from some other members of our leadership team. It's my pleasure to introduce our majority whip, Cody Fuller.
Thanks for the introduction, Leader Gilbert. As you alluded to, the road to good intentions. They are good intention, but unfortunately, the net effect is going to be detrimental to the Commonwealth. So, for instance, when they increased the minimum wage on farm families and did not take into account that many family farms provide the biggest benefit to that employee, which is their housing. And now they're going to have to raise wages. And what they'll end up doing is renting out that house in order to cover the $15 minimum wage. The minimum wage increase in general is going to have a detrimental effect to the Commonwealth. The biggest thing that the Democrats have done is raise taxes. So yes, they're going to give a $15 minimum wage, but all that's going to get eaten up in taxes because they're not going to be able to afford things. Your localities are going to raise property taxes, which detrimentally affects the poor. And so the cost of food will go up. The cost of food has gone up. Virginians are now putting more money into their grocery bill than ever before. And so it has everything that they have done has just ratcheted up. There's been absolutely no reduction. How do they pay for everything that they've done or put in the budget? It's with a tax increase, a $1.6 billion over what the governor has introduced. And so I contend that they're not making lives easier for the citizens of the Commonwealth. They're actually making them harder. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our caucus chair, our fearless leader, Amanda.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today. The high price of housing is an issue that affects all Virginians. Driving down housing costs and expanding access was a priority for Republicans this year. It's an issue that Democrats also claim to support. So let's consider the two routes that we took. Republicans looked at the fact that about 25% of home building costs are tied to regulatory burdens. We proposed bills that decrease some unnecessary regulatory demands in order to drive down the cost of home building, which would allow for increased production and more access to affordable housing. Democrats, on the other hand, proposed multiple new regulatory burdens, which will only add to the cost of construction. Those costs will then be passed down to home buyers and to tenants as well. They also proposed rent control, even though decades of research shows that it causes housing shortages and actually reduces opportunities for low-income buyers to enter a new housing market. And it also makes it harder for landlords to have the resources that they need in order to invest in and improve and expand their properties. It also makes it more challenging for those landlords to evict tenants who are delinquent in their rent. At the end of the day, and at the end of this session, Democrats proved that they either do not understand or flat out do not support policies that would allow for expanded access to affordable housing here in our Commonwealth. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce Delegate O'Quinn, our Deputy Leader.
Well, thank you, Amanda, and good afternoon, everybody. So I want to talk for a minute about education, and that's something that I've been passionate about because it's very important, not only for the Commonwealth, but particularly in our part of Virginia. And our friends on the other side of the aisle said a lot in recent days about how much money they want to give teachers in pay raises and other such financial priorities. And again, pay raises, school construction, at-risk add-on funding, those are all things that I've stood in front of this very podium and advocated for. And we made massive strides on those fronts. We got a lot of money going into school construction. We put nearly 20% in teacher pay raises over the last biennium when we were in the majority. But I think what is not being realized at the moment is that it isn't money that teaches our children. It's teachers. It's living, breathing human beings. And teachers need their jobs. They need fair compensation, but they also need the support of the Virginia General Assembly. And for 2 sessions in a row, we have tried to put teachers back in charge of their classroom. We have said if a student is unruly or disruptive, they should be sent to the principal's office. And if they're violent, they go to the principal's office immediately. But Democrats decided to take a little bit different path, and they decided to pass legislation that moves it, and that makes it much more difficult to remove a disruptive or disorderly student during educational time. They killed legislation that would allow school boards to decide on a policy that would prohibit cell phone use during educational time. This is pretty basic stuff. They defeated legislation would require schools to alert parents within 24 hours if there's an overdose in the school. That's information that parents deserve and need to know. And ultimately, one of the things that I think I was probably most disappointed with was the cut in funding to the school resource officer program, something that over a course of time we have built up significantly in the Commonwealth. And if you go visit a school, particularly in our part of the state, the most popular person in the entire school is the school resource officer because of all the work that they do and the assistance all the way across the board that they provide to teachers, administrators, and students. And with the scourge of fentanyl that we have, there is absolutely no doubt that school resource officers could have been of great assistance on many fronts, but particularly with that. And when I go to a lot of schools and when I talk to parents and talk to teachers, talk to students, everyone is terrorized by the influx of fentanyl in our public school system. And so of all the times to cut SRO funding, now was not the time. So unfortunately, I feel like that things are not getting ready to get better in our public school system. I think they're about ready to get a lot worse. So with that, I'll call back up Leader Gilbert to wrap up.
So the final thing I want to talk about is something near and dear to my heart that having spent 14 years previously as a prosecutor and some 25 years in criminal justice collectively, it's an area I understand, and I understand the impact on Virginia's communities when we get it wrong. The last time our colleagues were in charge, they spent a lot of time and effort focusing on making life better for criminals and people who were incarcerated for very serious crimes. And all, I would argue, very much to the detriment of actual victims of crimes. And that whole narrative was flipped, that the victims of the criminal justice system were these criminals and not the victims of crime themselves. This session, frankly, showed little difference other than we have a governor with a veto pen ready to veto some of these bills. You saw bills advancing that all of a sudden the brakes were hit. The so-called second look bill that would have given every single offender, including violent offenders, sex offenders, everything you can imagine, including people who were previously on death row, give them the opportunity to petition for a second sentencing event. That got brakes got put on that once people figured out that this was probably just a bad narrative. Once it was clear that the governor was going to veto that bill. Similarly, there was a bill that made it all the way to the floor before course was reversed, which would have run crimes sentences concurrently, given those same types of offenders the ability to get out sooner when they had done additional crimes like using a firearm in the commission of a felony, etc. Rather than focus on programs, frankly, that save lives from the use of a firearm, they instead focused on trying to make life harder on law-abiding Virginians when they purchase a firearm, possess a firearm, just have a firearm for their own personal safety. That it tends to always be the focus, not on the criminals, not on punishing people for their bad actions with a firearm. And that was laid bare this session. Our colleagues attempted to change the law and are attempting to change the law that will allow illegal immigrants to avoid deportation by changing the sentencing, by altering our very structure of our criminal sentencing code to make sure that they don't bear that consequence when they commit crimes while they're in the country illegally. They passed a bill to prevent judges and prosecutors from asking about someone's illegal immigration status. We talked earlier about, or I talked earlier about the consequences of some of these early release policies and how it's detrimental to our communities. We know of at least 2 people that have lost their lives to murder because they were released early under some of these previous programs that are still in place. Conversely, Republicans had the radical idea of locking up repeat offenders who use firearms. Our colleagues couldn't be bothered to hear that or consider it because that is not their focus. Republicans also brought forward legislation that would have treated drug dealers who kill with fentanyl like the killers they are and would have locked them up for a very long time. Again, our colleagues could not be bothered with that being a priority for them in terms of public policy. So I contend that we would have seen a lot more things moving forward to the governor than you saw. People thought better of certain of these things that I just referenced because of the ultimate consequence, but given the opportunity, this will continue to be a priority for Democrats on the other side, pursuing this goal of having fewer consequences for your criminal actions and getting out early if you do get caught. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or have any of our colleagues up here answer any questions you may have. They probably have nothing to do with anything we've talked about, so I know you guys well enough.
You look right at me.
Well, I'm gonna go first.
There we go. The governor has said if he brought an arena bill back, he would win a majority vote. Is he capable of doing that at reconvening on the budget? And do you believe him, or do you have the caucus's belief that that would hit?
I think there are a number of avenues available still to the governor. I think all that. I think that project was a lot more popular, if you will, in that a lot more people saw the potential for it as a very good deal for Virginia than perhaps one person did. And I think if they had the opportunity to vote on it, you'd see a lot broader support than perhaps is being projected under the current circumstance of the budget.
If he comes back to reconvene, what was it in the proposed budget? Or do you guys get to circumvent leadership to make it happen? No? Maybe? Who knows?
Well, I don't know. I think the House and Senate may have a different mind in terms of their leadership. So I think it's a question of circumventing some other folks who aren't here, and I think all that's on the table still.
Regarding the bills that have been passed, the ones you're really concerned about, what are your key focus points that you're having with the governor about vetoing or amending to more suit which party sees?
Yeah, I think, they sent a lot of things to the governor that obviously he doesn't intend to sign, and I think he's got a lot to consider, and he's got a little time now to consider what's left. And I can't speak for the governor, so I don't know what he may do, but I think that obviously the governor tends to be in line with what you've seen in terms of our collective votes over the course of the session.
Thoughts on what he did with the 7-day bills?
I think he was very circumspect and limited in his actions, and you're going to see that play out. I don't know if we're going to do it today or if they're going to choose to do it when we come back, but I think from what I've seen from his explanations, he was very thoughtful about what he did and didn't do. He's made those statements himself, so I'm not going to speak to that any further. Sir. Yes, sir.
What's your reaction to the governor's veto of the bill for Virginia to rejoin ARIC?
Yeah, the governor has serious concerns about that issue and about how it affects us and our voting system. I think he's wanted to make sure that we have a system that works, that's accountable, that, I'm not one of those people who says that our system is ultimately broken. It is like any system capable of being improved. And certainly I support the governor's position on that particular organization.
You mentioned the second look legislation. Is that something defeating that you would point to as the biggest success for the Republican caucus this session?
I guess you could call it that. I mean, some would say that perhaps if we had eased back and let them do what they fully intended to do, that maybe we could have brought better attention to what ultimately I think their plans are for the criminal justice system. So in a sense, it's a victory that we're able to stop it for now. But I contend that should Democrats in the future have all three moving parts, the House, the Senate, and the governor, that we're going to see bills like that fly through. So what I think is a victory for us right now is being able to call attention to it in the eyes of the public without it advancing to that point, so that hopefully, in some dystopian future, if that were to be the case, that we could perhaps affect the outcome. But we've got elections between now and then, so we're hopeful that we're in a position in the future to do something about it more directly.
You got time for one or two more. They got to go to caucus.
Okay, I'm sorry if I missed this at the beginning, but what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, you don't get a do-over. Correct?
No second look?
Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on the budget? There seem like some pretty profound issues that the governor might have with some of the underpinning parts of the budget that's coming through. Are you anticipating a lot of Republican support, and what do you think the governor might do?
I think he's looking at it very hard. I think he's certainly takes a dim view of the tax increase that is embodied in this bill, in this budget bill. Most specifically, some of the spending priorities are out of line with his and ours collectively. We're not in control of how it gets drafted. We do try to have input where we can. But certainly the tax increase is looming large as a non-starter for the governor and extremely problematic for the majority of our caucus. Yes, ma'am.
Following up on Cam's question, can you give us a sort of wish list or your number one bills that you would like to see vetoed by the governor? What are your priorities?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's far too long for me to try to do right now.
Just a few?
Well, I mean, I kind of listed the various subject areas when we started. I mean, we just have a philosophical difference. All of us want the same things, I think. We want to see people prosper, and we want to see people be able to afford to make ends meet and have a better life, for their kids than they had for themselves. All of that. We just have a very different view